The multiple meanings of the word history. The history of Germany, the history of France, the complement differs in those two phrases, whereas the notion of history retains the same meaning. The history of mankind, the history of technology, the history of science, the history of this or that art. Not only are the complements different, but even the word history means something different in each case. The great Dr. A invents an ingenious method of treating an illness, but 10 years later, Dr. B devises another treatment more effective, such that the earlier method, ingenious as it was, is abandoned and forgotten. The history of science has the nature of progress. Applied to art, the notion of history has nothing to do with progress. It does not imply improvement, amelioration, and ascent. It resembles a journey undertaken to explore unknown lands and chart them. The novelist's ambition is not to do something better than his predecessors, but to see what they did not see, say what they did not say. Flaubert's poetics does not devalue Balzac's any more than the discovery of the North Pole renders obsolete the discovery of America. The history of technology depends little on man and his freedom. Obedient to its own logic, it cannot be other than what it has been or what it will be. In that sense, it is non-human. If Edison had not invented the light bulb, someone else would have. But if Lawrence Stern had not had the wild idea of writing a novel with no story, no one else would have done it in his stead, and the history of the novel would not be the one we know. A history of literature, unlike history as such, ought to list only the names of victories, for its defeats are no victory for anyone. That brilliant line of Julian Grax draws out all the implications of the fact that, unlike history as such, the history of literature is not a history of events, but the history of values. Without Waterloo, the history of France would be incomprehensible, but the Waterloos of minor and even major writers belong in oblivion and nowhere else. History as such, the history of mankind, is the history of things that no longer exist and do not join directly in our lives. The history of art, because it is the history of values, thus of things we need, is always present, always with us. We listen to Monteverdi and Stravinsky at the same concert. And since they are always with us, the values of works of art are constantly being challenged, defended, judged, and judged again. But how to judge them? In the realm of art, there are no precise measures for that. Each aesthetic judgment is a personal wager, but a wager that does not close off into its own subjectivity, that faces up to other judgments, seeks to be acknowledged, aspires to objectivity. In the collective consciousness, the history of the novel over its whole span from Rabelais to our own times is thus in constant transformation. Shaped by competence and incompetence, intelligence and stupidity, and above all, forgetting, which never stops enlarging its enormous cemetery where, alongside non-values, lie buried values that have been underestimated, unrecognized, or forgotten. This inevitable injustice makes the history of art profoundly human. The beauty of a sudden density of life. In Dostoevsky's novels, the clock constantly marks the time. Quote, "It was about 9 in the morning," end of quote, is the first line in The Idiot. At that moment, by pure coincidence, yes, the novel opens with an enormous coincidence. 3 characters who have never met before gather in a train compartment. Mishkin, Rogozhin, Lebedev. Their conversation soon turns to the book's heroine, Nastasia Philippovna. At 11 o'clock, Mishkin calls at General Epanchin's house. At 11:30, he is dining with the general's wife and 3 daughters. Nastasia Philippovna appears once again in the conversation. We learn that a certain Tatsky, who had been keeping her, is trying very hard to marry her off to Epanchin's secretary, Ganya, and that in the course of a party for her 25th birthday that evening, she is to announce her decision. Lunch over, Ganya takes Mishkin back to his family's apartment. Totally unexpected, Nastasia Philippovna comes in, and shortly after that, every scene in Dostoevsky is accented by unexpected appearances. Rogozhin arrives, drunk and accompanied by other drunks. Nastasia's party that night is full of agitation. Tatsky impatiently awaits the wedding announcement. Mishkin and Rogozhin both declare their own love to her, and Rogozhin hands her, besides, a packet of 100 million rubles, which she flings into the fireplace. The party ends late in the night, and with it, the first of the novel's 4 parts. In some 250 pages, 15 hours of one day and only 4 settings: the train, Epanchinkin's house, Ganya's apartment, Nastasia's apartment. Until then, such a concentration of events within so compressed a time and space could only be found in the theater. Behind an extreme dramatization of actions, Ganya slaps Mishkin, Varya spits in Ganya's face, Rogozhin and Mishkin declare their love to the same woman at the same moment. Every aspect of ordinary life vanishes. This is the poetics of the novel in Scott, in Balzac, and in Dostoevsky. The novelist wants to tell everything by scenes, but describing a scene takes too much space. The need to maintain suspense requires an extreme density of action, and hence the paradox. The novelist wants to hold on to all the plausibility of life's prose, but the scene becomes so thick with event, so overflowing with coincidence, that it loses both its prosaic nature and its plausibility. But to me, that theatricalization of the scene is not a mere technical necessity, and still less a shortcoming. For that accumulation of events, with whatever it might contain of the exceptional and the barely believable, is above all fascinating. When that happens to us in our own lives, who could deny it? It fills us with wonder, delights us, becomes unforgettable. The scenes in Balzac or in Dostoevsky, the last great Balzacian of the novel form, reflects a quite particular beauty, a beauty that is very rare, but nonetheless real, and a kind that everyone has known, or at least glimpsed in the course of his own life. It brings to mind the libertine bohemia of my youth. My friends used to declare that there was no more gorgeous experience for a man than to make love to 3 different women in a single day. Not as the mechanical workings of an orgy, but as a personal adventure resulting from some unexpected confluence of opportunities, surprises, lightning seductions. That, quote, 3-woman day, end of quote, extremely rare, dreamlike, had a dazzling charm which, I see today, consisted not in some athletic sexual performance, but in the epic beauty of a rapid series of encounters in which each woman, seen against the backdrop of the one before, seemed even more unique, and their 3 bodies were like 3 long notes, played each on a different instrument and bound together in a single chord. It was a quite particular beauty, the beauty of a sudden density of life. The power of the pointless. In 1879, for the second edition of Sentimental Education, the first was in 1869, Flaubert made changes in the paragraphing. He never broke one into several, but he often linked them into longer paragraphs. This seems to me to reveal his deep aesthetic intention to de-theatricalize the novel, to de-dramatize, de-Balzacise it, to enclose an action, a gesture, a response within a larger whole, to dissolve them into the running water of the everyday. The everyday, it is not merely ennui, pointless, repetition, triviality. It is beauty as well. For instance, the magical charm of atmospheres, a thing everyone has felt in his own life. A strain of music heard faintly from the next apartment, the wind rattling the window pane, the monotonous voice of a professor that a lovesick schoolgirl hears without registering. These trivial circumstances stamp some personal event with an inimitable singularity that dates it and makes it unforgettable. But Flaubert went even further in his investigation of everyday banality. It is 11 in the morning. Emma arrives at her rendezvous in the cathedral and wordlessly hands Léon, her still platonic lover, the letter saying that she wants no more of their encounters. Then she moves off, kneels, and begins to pray. As she stands up, a tour guide approaches and offers to show them around the church. To sabotage the rendezvous, Emma agrees, and the couple is forced to stop at a tomb, look up at the equestrian statue of the dead man, move along to other tombs and other statues, and listen to the guide's recitation, which Flaubert reproduces in all its foolishness and boring length. In a fury, unable to take anymore, Léon breaks off the tour, pulls Emma out onto the church square, hails a cab, and there begins the famous scene of which all we see or hear is a man's voice now and then from inside the carriage, ordering the driver to turn down yet another new road so that the journey goes on and the lovemaking never ends. One of the most famous erotic scenes in literature is set off by an utter banality, a silly boar and his dogged chatter. In the theater, a great action could only be born of some other great action. The novel alone could reveal the immense, mysterious power of the pointless. The beauty of death. Why does Anna Karenina kill herself? The answer seems clear enough. For years, people in her world have turned away from her. She is suffering at the separation from her son, Seryozha. Even if Vronsky still loves her, she fears for that love. She is exhausted with it, overexcited, unwholesomely and unjustly jealous. She feels trapped. Yes, all that is clear, but is a trapped person necessarily doomed to suicide? So many people adapt to living in a trap. Even if we understand the depth of her sorrow, Anna's suicide remains an enigma. When Oedipus learns the terrible truth about his identity, when he sees Jocasta hanging, he stabs out his eyes. From the moment he was born, a causal inevitability has led him with mathematical certainty toward this tragic denouement. But there is no extraordinary event when Anna, in the 7th part of that novel, first thinks of death as a possibility. It is Friday, 2 days before her suicide. In torment after a dispute with Vronsky, she suddenly recalls something she had said years back in excitement, a while after she gave birth. Quote, "How is it I am not dead?" End of quote. And now she lingers long over the line. Take note. It is not that Anna, seeking a way out of the trap, comes through logic to the notion of death. Rather, it is a memory subtly whispering it to her. She thinks of death a second time the next day, Saturday. She muses that the only way to punish Vronsky, to reconquer his love, would be suicide. Thus, suicide not as a way out of the trap, but as amorous vengeance. In order to sleep, she takes a sedative and loses herself in a sentimental reverie on her own death. She imagines Vronsky bent in torment over her body, then realizing that her death is only a fantasy, she feels a great surge of joy at life. No, anything but death. I love him. He loves me too. We've been through terrible times like this before, and everything worked out. The following day, Sunday, is the day of her death. In the morning, once again, they argue, and Vronsky has scarcely left to see his mother in her villa outside Moscow when Anna sends him a message. "I was wrong. Come back. We must talk. In the name of heaven, come back. I'm frightened." Then she decides to go visit Dolly, her sister-in-law, to confide her miseries. She climbs into a carriage, sits back, and lets the thoughts flow freely through her head. This is not logical reflection. It is untrammeled brain activity in which everything comes jumbled at once. Shreds of thought, observations, memories. The moving carriage is ideal for this sort of silent monologue. The outside world reeling past her eyes is uninterrupted food for her thoughts. Office and shops, dentist. Yes, I'm going to tell Dolly everything. It will be hard to do. Tell her everything, but I'll do it. Stendhal likes to cut off the sound in the middle of a scene. We stop hearing dialogue and start to follow a character's secret thinking. This is always a very logical, condensed reflection by which Stendhal shows us his hero's strategy as he goes about evaluating the situation and deciding how to respond. Anna's silent monologue, on the other hand, is not at all logical. It is not even a reflection. It is the flood of everything going through her head at a given moment. Here, Tolstoy is anticipating what Joyce will do 50 years later, far more systematically, in Ulysses, what will be called interior monologue or stream of consciousness. Tolstoy and Joyce were haunted by the same obsession: to seize what occurs in a person's head during a present moment, and a moment later will be gone forever. But there is a difference. With his interior monologue, Tolstoy examines not, as Joyce will do later, an ordinary banal day, but instead the decisive moments of his heroine's life. And that is much harder, for the more dramatic, unusual, grave a situation is, the more the person describing it tends to minimize its concrete qualities, to neglect its non-logical prose and substitute the implacable and simplistic logic of tragedy. Tolstoy's examination of the prose of a suicide is therefore a great achievement, a discovery that has no parallel in the history of the novel and never will have. When she she reaches Dolly's house, Anna is incapable of telling her anything. She soon leaves, climbs back into the carriage, and sets off again. There follows the second interior monologue, street scenes, observations, associations. Back home, she finds the telegram from Vronsky saying that he is in the country with his mother and will not return before 10 in the evening. After her emotional cry of that morning, quote, "In the name of heaven, come back, I'm frightened," end of quote, she was hoping for some equally emotional reply, and unaware that Vronsky had not got that message, she feels wounded. She decides to take the train and go to him. Again, she is seated in the carriage, and we hear the third interior monologue, street scenes, a beggar woman holding a baby. Why should she imagine she inspires pity? Aren't we all of us flung onto this earth to hate and torment each other? Oh, some schoolboys playing around there. My little Seryozha. She leaves her carriage and settles into the train. There, a new element enters the scene, ugliness. From the window of her compartment, she sees a misshapen woman hurrying by on the platform. Mentally, she undresses her to chill herself with the woman's ugliness. The woman is followed by a little girl, laughing affectedly, false and pretentious. A man appears, filthy and ugly in a military cap. Finally, a couple settles into the seat across from her. She finds them repulsive. The man is talking some foolishness to his wife. All rational thought has left her head. Her aesthetic perception becomes hypersensitive. A half hour before she herself is to quit the world, she is seeing beauty quit it. The train stops and she steps down to the platform. There she is handed a new message from Vronsky confirming his return at 10 in the evening. She continues to walk in the crowd, her senses assaulted from all sides by vulgarity, hideousness, mediocrity. A freight train moves into the station. Abruptly, she recalled the man who was crushed the day she first met Vronsky, and she understood what she had to do. And it is only then that she decides to die. The crushed man, she remembers, was a railway worker who fell beneath a train at the very moment she saw Vronsky for the first time. What does it mean, that symmetry? That framing of her whole love story by the motif of a double death at the railway station? Is it a poetic manipulation of Tolstoy's, his way of playing with symbols? Let us review the situation. Anna has gone to the station to find Vronsky, not to kill herself. Once she is on the platform, she is suddenly surprised by a memory and seduced by the unexpected chance to give her love story a finished, beautiful shape, to tie its beginning to its end by the same railroad station setting and the same motif of death beneath the wheels. For without knowing it, mankind lives under the seductive spell of beauty, and Anna, stifled by the ugliness of existence, has become all the more susceptible to it. She descends a few stairs and reaches the tracks. The freight train draws near. A sensation gripped her like one she used to feel long ago when, off for a swim, she prepared to plunge into the water. A miraculous sentence. In a single second, the last one of her life, the extreme gravity calls up a pleasant, ordinary, light-hearted memory. Even at the poignant moment of her death, Anna is far from Sophocles' tragic way. She does not leave the mysterious way of prose, where ugliness rubs shoulders with beauty, where the rational gives over to illogic, and where an enigma remains an enigma. She drew her head back into her shoulders, and, hands stretched before her, fell beneath the train. The shame of repeating oneself. During one of my first visits to Prague after the implosion of the communist regime in 1989, a friend who had lived there the whole while told me, "We need a Balzac, because what you're seeing here is the restoration of a capitalist society with everything cruel and stupid that involves, with the vulgarity of crooks and parvenus. Commercial stupidity has replaced ideological stupidity, but what makes this new experience picturesque is that it's still got the old one fresh in its memory. That the two experiences are telescoped together, and that, like in Balzac's time, history sets up some incredible imbroglios. And he went on to tell me the story of an old man, a one-time high party official who 25 years back married off his daughter to the son of a grand bourgeois family whose property had been expropriated. For a wedding present, he promptly arranged a fine career for the boy. Today, the old apparatchik is living out his days in isolation. His son-in-law's family has recovered its once nationalized holdings, and the daughter is ashamed of her communist father and only dares to see him in secret. My friend laughs. You realize? It's word for word the story of Père Goriot, the man who was powerful during the Reign of Terror, manages to marry his two daughters off to class enemies who later, at the Restoration, won't acknowledge him, and the old papa can never meet with them in public. We laughed a long time over that. Today I think back on that laughter. Why exactly were we laughing? Was that old apparatchik so ridiculous? Ridiculous for repeating someone else's experience? But it wasn't he. It was history that was repeating itself. And to do that, it's necessary to be without shame, without intelligence, without taste. It's history's poor taste that made us laugh. That brings me back to my friend's exhortation. Is it true that the period people are living through now in Bohemia cries out for its Balzac? Maybe it would be enlightening for the Czechs to read novels about the return of capitalism to their country. A broad, rich novel cycle with many characters written like Balzac. But no novelist worthy of the name will write such a novel. It would be ridiculous to write another human comedy because while history, mankind's history, might have the poor taste to repeat itself, the history of an art will not stand for repetitions. Art isn't there to be some great mirror registering all of history's ups and downs, variations, endless repetitions. Art is not a village band marching dutifully along at history's heels. It is there to create its own history. What will ultimately remain of Europe is not its repetitive history, which in itself represents no value. The one thing that has some chance of enduring is the history of its arts.